He told her he had another wife, not to hurt her, but to see if she still loved him enough to fight for him. What happened next changed everything. Hello guys, before we start this amazing story, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our new stories. Now, enjoy. In a quiet town in Nigeria, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's story, there lived a man named Chike and his wife, Amora. Their marriage had once been the kind that made neighbors whisper with admiration. They laughed together, shared secrets late into the night, and their small house always felt alive with warmth. But as the years passed, little cracks began to show. Chike noticed how Amora no longer looked at him with the same spark, how she brushed off his jokes and gave more of her time to friends and family than to him. He tried to ignore it, but his pride wouldn't let him rest. One evening, after another long day where Amora barely spoke to him, Chike sat outside on the wooden bench near their compound, thinking of a way to win her back. But his heart carried a strange idea, one that seemed almost mischievous. If she no longer valued his presence, maybe she would if she thought someone else did. He would pretend. He would weave a story about another woman, a second wife, not real, just a ghost he could use to stir her heart. The plan started small. He began dropping hints, casually mentioning he was late because someone needed his attention. He left his phone in places Amora could easily see, with strange names saved in it, names she had never heard before. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was business. But something inside her began to tighten. Chike noticed the change. She watched him more closely, her eyes following him when he stepped outside to take calls. She asked small questions, pretending to be careless, yet her tone carried weight. One night, while they were eating, she looked up from her plate and asked, "Chike, who is Ngozi?" His heart almost leapt, but he kept his voice calm. "Just someone I know," he said, brushing it off as though it didn't matter. The way she pressed her lips together told him it did matter, more than she wanted to admit. From that day, the air in their home shifted. Amora grew quieter, but her silence was heavy with thought. She studied his movements, the times he left, the way he smiled at his phone. And Chike, though he was only acting, began to feel both guilty and powerful. Guilty because he saw the pain flicker in her eyes, powerful because his plan was working. One late afternoon, when the neighborhood children were playing outside and the smell of firewood smoke drifted through the air, Amora followed him with her gaze as he prepared to step out again. "You spend so much time away now," she said softly, her voice almost breaking. Chike paused, a part of him longing to drop the act and hold her, but his stubbornness refused to let go. He turned with a sly smile and replied, "Maybe I have someone who listens better." Her face stiffened, her spoon clattered against her plate, and she excused herself. Chike sat there alone, pretending to eat, but his chest felt heavy. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? To make her care, to make her fight for him. Yet as night fell and she did not return to the room they shared, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering just how far this game would take them. The next morning, Amora was up earlier than usual, her face calm, almost too calm. She greeted him, served his food, and acted as though nothing had happened. Chike couldn't read her anymore, and that unsettled him. Had she truly grown jealous, or was she preparing something of her own? For the first time, he realized this little play he had started was no longer fully under his control. Chike woke up the next morning to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere in the distance, but the bed beside him was empty. Amora had already risen. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and wondered why the silence in the house felt different. The pot in the kitchen was clattering, but the way she moved about had no rhythm to it, no hum of a song the way she used to sing when cooking. It was quiet, too quiet, and that quietness pressed on him harder than any angry words could. He sat at the table, waiting, watching her serve his food. The aroma of yam porridge filled the small room, but her face gave nothing away. No smile, no frown, just calm. She slid the plate toward him and said, "Eat before it gets cold." That was all. Her voice carried no emotion. For the first time since his plan began, he felt unsettled. As he ate, she sat across from him, folding her arms. She asked nothing about where he had been the night before. She didn't mention Gozi, or the phone calls, or the strange names. That silence was more frightening than her suspicion. It was as if she had stepped into another world inside her mind, a place where he was no longer the center. When he left for work, Amora watched him go with the same unreadable look. Chike forced himself to appear confident, even whistling as he walked away. But once he reached the dusty road leading to the market, he let out a long breath. His plan had been to make her restless, to make her cling to him again, but what if she had gone past restlessness into indifference? The thought gnawed at him. Later that day, he returned with a small bag of oranges, her favorite. He placed them on the table with a smile, expecting her to brighten. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you," and continued cutting vegetables. No flicker of surprise, no warmth. The house, once filled with their playful banter, now felt like a stage where each word was carefully chosen, each gesture measured. That night, Amora didn't join him in their room until very late. She slipped in quietly, lay on her side, and faced the wall. Chike stared at her back, torn between confessing and holding on to his pride. He whispered, "Good night, Amora." She didn't respond. He lay there wide awake, his own words echoing in his head. The next morning, she dressed carefully, wearing a wrapper and blouse that brought out her beauty. She tied her headscarf with precision and added a touch of perfume. Chike frowned as he watched her. She wasn't going to church, and it wasn't market day. He asked, "Where are you heading?" She smiled faintly, "Just visiting a friend." Something in the way she said it made his chest tighten. 4 years, Amora had never cared much for appearances when visiting friends. Why now? His mind raced. Was this her answer to his so-called second wife? Was she showing him that she too could command attention? He decided to play along, to push further. "I hope your friend treats you well. At least you'll have someone to listen to you," he said, hoping to sting her the way his earlier words had done. She looked him straight in the eye, a spark flashing for the first time in days, and replied, "Don't worry. I'll be fine." Then she walked out, her steps firm, her head held high. Chike sat down, his food untouched. For the first time, he felt fear. Not the fear of losing her love, but the fear that his game might have given her permission to dream of life without him. The days that followed grew heavier. Amora continued her calm routine, speaking to him when necessary, smiling politely, but no longer pouring her heart into their conversations. She moved around the house like a woman who had made peace with something he could not see. Chike, restless, found himself pacing the compound, pretending to make calls, exaggerating his fake stories, but her indifference cut him deeper than jealousy ever could. One evening, while sitting outside, he overheard the neighbors chatting. They were speaking about Amora. "Did you see her the other day? She looked so beautiful. I almost didn't recognize her," one woman said. "She carries herself like a queen now," another added. Chike's jaw tightened. That wasn't what he had planned. He wanted her tied to him, yearning, not walking around glowing in the eyes of others. His chest burned as he realized the story was no longer about his make-believe wife, it was about Amora, and how she was beginning to shine without him. That night, when she came in after speaking with her cousin outside, Chike stopped her at the door. His voice shook despite his effort to sound firm. "Amora, where do you go these days? Who are these friends you keep visiting?" She turned slowly, met his eyes, and said calmly, "I thought you didn't care. You already have someone who listens better." The words sliced through him. For the first time, he wished he could undo his own lie. But pride chained his tongue. He stood there, watching her walk past him, her perfume lingering in the air, wondering if this game he started would cost him more than he could bear. And as he lay in bed that night, wide awake, the weight of silence pressing on him, he realized the story he had created had slipped from his hands. It was no longer his script to control. It was hers. The next morning, Chike rose earlier than usual, determined to reclaim the upper hand. He sat by the window, waiting for Amora to stir, but she walked past him with quiet grace, tying her wrapper and adjusting her scarf as if he wasn't even there. She had never been one to ignore him before. He felt invisible in his own home, and that stung far deeper than any argument could. When she finally sat to eat, he leaned forward, trying to provoke a reaction. "Amora," he began, his voice carrying a false calm, "Ngozi cooked for me yesterday. She said I should stop eating food that looks tired." He smirked, hoping to spark jealousy. But Amora didn't flinch. She lifted her spoon, tasted her food slowly, then looked at him with eyes that betrayed nothing. "Then you should eat more with Ngozi," she said, her voice flat but steady. That answer knocked the air out of him. He expected anger, maybe tears, but not this steel. For the rest of the day, Chaik couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. He thought of the way she had looked at him. No pain, no begging, just a calm strength. It was as if she had drawn a circle around herself and decided he no longer had power to disturb her peace. Later that afternoon, as he walked through the market, he overheard two men whispering nearby. One nudged the other and said, "That's Chaik. I heard his wife Amora is glowing these days. She carries herself like a woman loved by the gods." The other chuckled, "Meanwhile, he's chasing shadows." Chaik clenched his fists. Gossip had already begun. What had he started? He returned home restless, his heart heavy with the realization that his little game had spilled into the open world. He wasn't just lying to his wife anymore, he was living inside a story that others were now telling for him. That evening, Amora returned from her visit wearing a soft smile. Not the polite one she had worn for days, but a genuine smile that reminded him of years past, when she used to greet him with joy. Except this smile wasn't for him. She had walked in humming softly, her spirit light, as if she carried a secret warmth he couldn't touch. Chaik couldn't stand it. "Amora," he blurted, "tell me where you go every day. Who do you spend your time with? You think I don't notice how you leave the house dressed like you're going to a festival?" She paused, looked at him, and spoke with a calmness that burned more than anger ever could. "For years, I stayed home, waiting, giving you my laughter, my time, my heart. You wanted me to notice another woman, so I did. Now, I notice myself." She walked past him, her head high, and went to her room. Chaik stood frozen. Her words echoed in his mind. She wasn't jealous. She wasn't broken. She was rebuilding herself, and in that process, she was slipping away from him. That night, sleep abandoned him. He kept turning on the bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the years he had taken her presence for granted. He remembered the first time he had met her in the village, how her laughter had rung like a bell, how he had promised to always keep that joy alive. When had he lost his way? And now, what if he had pushed her so far that she no longer needed him at all? The following day, he tried something different. He came home with gifts, new fabric from the market, golden earrings, her favorite suya wrapped in newspaper. He laid them out carefully on the table, waiting for her to be impressed. When she saw them, she smiled politely, said thank you, and placed them aside. She didn't embrace him, didn't rush to wear them, didn't give him the satisfaction he craved. "Don't you like them?" he asked, his voice breaking. "They are beautiful," she replied, "but beauty outside doesn't cover wounds inside." Then she walked away, leaving him crushed. Days turned into weeks, and the air in their home grew heavier. Chaik kept faking phone calls, sometimes loud enough for her to hear. He mentioned this imaginary Ngozi in passing, but Amora never took the bait. Instead, she grew more radiant, more focused on herself, more respected by neighbors. She began to help women in the community with small projects, teaching them how to cook better, how to braid hair, how to save money. She was no longer just Amora, his wife. She was becoming someone admired, independent, untouchable. The more she rose, the smaller Chaik felt. His friends began to notice too. One evening at the palm wine joint, a friend leaned close and whispered, "Chaik, be careful. You're playing with fire. Amora is not the kind of woman you can lose and find again. She is the kind you lose once, and she's gone forever." Those words haunted him. He went home that night and found Amora sitting outside under the moonlight, her eyes reflecting a calm glow. She wasn't waiting for him. She wasn't looking for him. She was simply at peace with herself. And for the first time, Chaik saw clearly what his pride had almost destroyed. But even as his heart trembled with regret, his stubborn mouth refused to speak. He sat beside her in silence, the distance between them louder than any storm. And as the night carried on, one question filled his mind: how much longer before Amora stopped being his wife in truth, even if she still lived under his roof? That night Chaik lay awake, staring into the darkness of their small room. The air felt heavier than before, carrying the quiet weight of things unsaid. Amora was already asleep, her breathing slow and steady, but he could not find rest. His mind replayed her words over and over: beauty outside doesn't cover wounds inside. It was not just her response to his gifts, it was a quiet truth that cut him deeper than anything else. The next morning, Amora rose before him again. The sun was still shy and pale in the sky, but she moved with a strange calm, as if she had decided her day belonged to her alone. She didn't call him for breakfast. Instead, she went straight to the well, carrying her bucket and ignoring his presence. Chaik watched her from the doorway. She was humming softly to herself, the tune unfamiliar but steady. He felt something stir inside him, something like regret mixed with fear. When she returned, she placed the water bucket gently inside, glanced at him without a word, and began sweeping the compound. Chaik stepped forward. "Amora," he said quietly, "why do you keep ignoring me?" She stopped sweeping, looking directly into his eyes. Her voice was calm but firm. "I am not ignoring you. I am learning to listen to myself again. You once said you wanted me to care. Now I am caring, not for you, but for me." His heart thudded hard. He wanted to argue, to explain, to pull her back into the world where she depended on him. But he could not. Her tone carried an unshakable certainty he had never heard before. The day stretched long. Chaik moved about, pretending to be busy with work, but his mind kept returning to her words. By evening, he decided to test her, to pull her back into the tension his lie had created. He told one of his friends to mention Ngozi during their gathering, making sure Amora would hear. When they all met later that night, Amora smiled politely at him, but she did not respond when the topic came up. Instead, she turned to speak to another neighbor, laughing softly. The way she carried herself seemed to say, she had risen above his game. That night, as they lay in bed, Chaik broke the silence. "Amora, what are you doing? Why don't you fight for us?" She turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I have fought, Chaik. I fought when I gave you my laughter every day, when I gave you my time, my dreams, my life. And I still fight, but not for your pride. I fight for me." Her words pierced him, and for the first time, Chaik felt something crumble inside. But instead of pleading, he turned away, closing his eyes, as if to hide the truth he could not admit, that he was losing her. The following days passed differently. Chaik still came home late, still mentioned Ngozi now and then, but the sharpness in her silence grew stronger. She stopped confronting him directly, instead letting her actions speak louder. She began spending her mornings at the market, talking to other women, learning new skills, and even selling some of her handmade crafts. The neighbors began to notice, and soon whispers spread that Amora was becoming more than just Chaik's wife. She was becoming her own story. One afternoon, Chaik returned home earlier than usual. The compound was quiet, and her room was locked. He heard voices outside and stepped closer. Amora was there, speaking to a group of women in soft but confident tones. They listened intently, nodding as she spoke. Her laughter rang out, lighter than before. Chaik felt a sharp pang in his chest, a mixture of envy and fear. When she returned inside, she found him sitting on the veranda. "You've been home early," she said softly. "I wanted to see what you were doing," he replied, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. She smiled faintly. "I'm building something, Chaik. Not for you, not for us, but for me." His chest tightened. That evening, he could barely eat. He watched her quietly as she prepared her wrapper for the night, the scent of her perfume lingering in the room. She moved with such certainty now, as if she had discovered something he could never take back from her. That night, sleep avoided him. He lay awake thinking of what he had done, how a lie meant to pull her closer had pushed her further away. He remembered the years they had spent together, the laughter and tears, the promises they had whispered to each other. And he wondered if pride had blinded him to what truly mattered. In the days that followed, Chaik tried to reach her again. He would call her softly in the morning, leave little gifts without speaking, and even try to cook her favorite meal. But Amora had grown distant in a way he could not mend. She would smile politely, thank him quietly, but return to her own life as if he were only a shadow in her world now. One afternoon, Chaik came home to find her sitting outside with her friends, her face lit by the sun. She was telling a story, her laughter carrying across the yard. Neighbors gathered around her, drawn by her voice. Chaik stood at the gate, watching quietly, a strange mix of pride and pain swelling inside him. For the first time, he wondered whether she was happier without him trying to hold her close. His fake jealousy had been meant to make her crave him again, but instead, it had awakened something in her, a life he could no longer touch. That night, he sat outside alone, staring at the sky. Somewhere in the distance, Amora's laughter floated in the air. He closed his eyes, wondering if his game had been the beginning of losing her for good. And deep inside, he knew that the rest of their story would depend on whether she would choose to return to him or walk away completely. The next morning came quietly. Chaik woke to the sound of birds and a soft breeze rustling the fabric of the curtain. But there was no warmth in the air, only a silence that pressed against him. Amora was gone before sunrise, as usual now, and he knew exactly where she had gone without asking. Her footsteps had become part of the rhythm of the village, her presence a story being told without him. He sat at the veranda, staring at the morning light, thinking of how far they had drifted. His pride still told him to keep up the act, to keep speaking of Ngozi in passing and watching her reaction, but a part of him, something deeper, wanted to tear down the walls he had built between them. But fear kept his lips sealed. Fear of what admitting the truth might cost him. Days turned into a pattern he couldn't break. He returned home later each night, watched her from a distance when she spoke to other women, and grew more restless with every quiet smile she shared with strangers. At the same time, he could not deny that Amora was blooming, her spirit shining brighter than ever. The neighbors began to talk openly about her. Some praised her courage, others whispered of a woman who had found her worth. One afternoon, Chaik found her sitting outside by the old mango tree, surrounded by children she was teaching to braid beads into bracelets. Her laughter was soft but certain, and the way she looked at them filled him with a strange longing. He stepped closer, but she didn't look up. "Amora," he said quietly, sitting beside her. She smiled faintly without turning her head. "You've been quiet today." "I've been thinking," he said, unsure if he was confessing or testing her. "About us." She finally turned to him, her eyes gentle but guarded. "And what have you thought?" "I thought maybe I was wrong," he said slowly. "Maybe I went too far." Her smile faded. She set aside the beads she had been holding and turned fully toward him. "You didn't go too far, Chaik. You went exactly where you wanted to go, you made me see myself. I've been here, living for you, believing I needed you to be complete. Now I know I was enough all along." Those words hit him harder than he expected. They were not words of anger, not words begging him to stop, but words of closure. That evening, Chaik tried again. He prepared a meal she loved, rice with stew, pepper soup with fresh fish, but she declined without much explanation, saying she had eaten at the market. He watched her as she moved about the compound, her steps calm and deliberate, as if she was walking away from something rather than toward him. He realized then that her distance was not about anger or pride anymore. It was about her reclaiming her own life. And the truth he feared the most settled in his heart: he might not be able to bring her back. For the next few days, Chaik wandered through the village aimlessly. He spoke to friends, drank palm wine at the corner stall, but his mind always returned to her. He watched her from afar, noting the way her laughter carried in the air, the way she drew people to her with warmth and quiet confidence. Every glance she gave him now was measured, not longing, not bitterness, but a clear sense that she was living a life that no longer depended on his approval. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, he decided to follow her, not in anger, not in hope, but to understand. She went to the river that bordered the village, carrying a small basket of food and a book. She found a quiet spot under a tree, opened the book, and began to read aloud softly. Children gathered around, and soon her voice was carrying across the water, drawing even the elders closer to listen. Chaik stood hidden behind a cluster of bushes, watching her. He saw the sparkle in her eyes, the way her lips curved with joy. It was not the joy she once gave him, it was something new, a joy born from freedom. For the first time, he felt powerless. His plan to make her jealous had not only failed, it had awakened a woman who no longer belonged to him. When she finally returned home that evening, her smile was calm but radiant. She carried herself differently now, as if she had stepped into a life she had claimed for herself. Chaik wanted to speak, to tell her he was sorry, to admit everything. But he could not find the words. Instead, he watched her disappear into their home, the door closing quietly behind her. And he sat outside long into the night, thinking about how the game he had started had become a story he could no longer control. The days grew heavier with unspoken truths. Chaik continued to speak of Ngozi, but Amora no longer reacted. She had stopped playing his game. Instead, she began to prepare for something he could not yet understand, a journey of her own. One evening, a neighbor approached him quietly while he was sitting outside. "Chaik," she said softly, "your wife is changing. She is not the woman who waits by the door anymore. She is building something. You should be careful. She might not come back." Chaik nodded silently, but inside, a storm was brewing. He did not know whether to fight harder or let her go. Somewhere deep in his heart, he feared that letting her go might mean losing the only thing he ever truly loved. That night, as the moonlight settled softly over the village, Chaik lay awake again. He thought of Amora's laughter, of her calm strength, and of the truth she had quietly taught him, that love cannot be forced, that pride can destroy more than it protects. And somewhere inside him, he knew that the days ahead would decide whether this story ended in reunion or in forever loss. The morning after that restless night, Chaik woke to the faint sound of Amora singing softly outside their house. The melody was unfamiliar, but it carried warmth, as though she was singing to herself, not for him. He lay still for a long while, listening, feeling a strange ache in his chest. Her voice was no longer just music, it was a statement, a quiet declaration of a world he could no longer touch. By the time he stepped outside, Amora was gone. In her place were small traces of her presence, a basket of flowers at the door, a pot of herbs simmering gently on the porch, and the faint scent of something sweet carried on the wind. Chaik walked around the compound slowly, touching the wooden gate, the walls, even the ground she had walked on. It was as if he was searching for her in everything she had left behind. The day passed without her returning until late afternoon. When she came back, her face was glowing, her steps light. She carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth and sat quietly on the veranda. Chaik approached her hesitantly, unsure if she wanted him close. "You've been away all day," he said softly, almost as if testing whether she would respond. "I was at the market," she replied without looking at him. "And then I went to the river." She opened the bundle slowly, revealing small clay figures she had shaped earlier. "I've been learning how to make things. I want to keep myself busy with something that feels mine." Her words landed in him like a weight he could not shift. He wanted to speak, to stop her, to pull her back, but the truth settled heavily in his throat, she was building a life without him. For the next week, Chaik watched quietly as Amora's days became full of purpose. Every morning, she went to the market before sunrise. She returned with new ideas, new friends, new laughter. She began selling her crafts in the village, teaching others, and sometimes bringing food for the children. Slowly, the compound transformed, not because he had changed, but because she had. One afternoon, curiosity overcame him. He followed her discreetly as she went to a distant part of the village, where a group of women gathered under a large tree. They greeted her warmly, and she joined them, her smile bright and confident. He watched as she taught them how to weave, explaining patiently, her voice carrying effortlessly over the chatter. For the first time, Chaik felt invisible. Not because she had stopped noticing him, but because she had found something so important that his presence no longer mattered in her world. He stood behind the bushes, watching her laugh, her hands moving with grace, and his chest tightened with a mix of envy and awe. When she finally returned home that evening, she did not greet him directly. She entered quietly, placing her basket down before retreating to her room. Chaik sat outside long into the night, thinking about what he had lost. Days turned into weeks. Chaik tried in subtle ways to draw her back. He bought her small gifts, returned home early, even began cooking her favorite meals again. But Amora's responses were polite yet distant. She acknowledged him with smiles that felt like passing waves, kind but fleeting. One evening, he came home to find her sitting outside under the fading light, surrounded by her clay figures and beads. She was shaping something with focused care, and when she noticed him, she smiled softly without speaking. "Amora," he said gently, sitting beside her. "I've been thinking, maybe I was wrong." She looked at him quietly for a moment, then turned back to her work. "You were not wrong to want my attention. You were wrong in how you thought you could get it. Love is not a game, Chaik." Her words hit him harder than any argument could. He wanted to say something, anything, but she continued working, her silence more powerful than any answer. That night, sleep eluded him again. He lay awake, thinking about every moment they had shared, the laughter, the tears, the stolen glances, the quiet mornings. He realized he had lost more than her affection. He had lost her trust, her belonging. The days became heavier. Chaik could see the changes in the village. People spoke about Amora differently now. Some admired her courage, others whispered about the woman who had learned to stand on her own. But no one spoke to Chaik about her the way they used to. It was as if she had stepped out of his story and into her own. One afternoon, Chaik decided to speak with her directly. He found her at the river, teaching the children how to braid beads into bracelets. She looked at him with a calm expression, neither surprised nor upset. "Amora," he began softly, "I want to understand. What is it you want from me now?" She paused, looking at him steadily. "I don't know if I want anything from you, Chaik. I want something for myself. I want to live without proving my worth to anyone." Her words were quiet but certain. Chaik felt something inside him shift. For the first time, he realized she was no longer in the space of their old story. She had moved beyond him, beyond the jealousy, beyond the lies. That night, he sat outside alone. The village was quiet, but her laughter from earlier still echoed in his mind. He knew deep inside that everything had changed. The game he had started had not brought her back to him, it had given her the courage to step away. And now, the question that haunted him was no longer whether she would come back, but whether he could ever let her go. The morning came quietly, without the usual stir of voices in the compound. Chaik woke to a stillness he had not known for months. Even the air felt different, as if the whole world had shifted overnight. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the faint light creeping through the window, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between him and Amora. When he stepped outside, she was already gone. The house was empty except for the soft sound of wind brushing against the clay walls. He walked slowly through the compound, tracing the places where she used to be, her chair at the veranda, the corner where she braided beads, the small space near the mango tree where she liked to sit in silence. But she was nowhere to be found. Hours passed before he saw her again. She returned in the afternoon, carrying a small bundle of cloth and a worn leather bag. Her expression was calm, her eyes carrying a kind of certainty he could not read. She did not greet him, did not even glance his way. She simply moved past him into the house. That evening, Chike could not stay still. He wandered toward the river where she had gone so often these past weeks. As he approached, he found her sitting on a smooth rock near the water, her basket beside her filled with her clay figures and beads. She was humming softly, the sound gentle, like a prayer. He hesitated before speaking, afraid to shatter the peace that surrounded her. Finally, he sat down a few steps away. "Amora," he said quietly, "I want to speak with you." She looked at him calmly, her eyes steady. "What is there left to speak about, Chike?" "I want to be honest," he said slowly. "I've been foolish. I made you jealous. I thought it would bring you closer, but I see now that it only pushed you away." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked out at the river, her fingers moving absent-mindedly over a small clay bracelet. The silence between them grew heavier until she finally spoke. "You wanted to keep me, but I have learned something important. Love is not about possession. It's about trust and respect." Her words were soft, but they carried the weight of truth. Chike felt something break inside him, not anger, not regret alone, but a deep understanding that he had lost more than her affection. He had lost the world they once shared. Days turned into weeks. Amora continued her life without asking him to join. She spent her mornings teaching, her afternoons selling her crafts, her evenings by the river. Chike watched from a distance, torn between wanting to speak to her and fearing that doing so would be selfish. One afternoon, he found her preparing her basket near the riverbank. She was gathering herbs and small trinkets she had made. He approached her slowly. "Amora," he said softly, "what will you do now?" She looked up at him, her eyes warm but firm. "I will keep going, Chike. I will live for myself now." The words cut deep. He wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but he knew it would be futile. Instead, he sat beside her, watching her work. For the first time, he felt the weight of silence not as something empty but as something filled with meaning. The nights grew longer. Chike spent them alone, walking through the village, speaking to friends who offered their own stories of love and loss. He began to understand that his plan to make her jealous had been born from fear, fear of losing her, fear of not being enough. But Amora had taught him something greater, that love could not be forced, and that the truest form of love was letting go. One evening, as the village prepared for the night, Amora came to him. She stood at the edge of the compound, holding her basket. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. "I'm leaving," she said softly. "I need to find what is mine to find." Chike felt his heart tighten, but he nodded. "Where will you go?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Somewhere I can be myself." She turned and walked away, her steps sure and unhesitant. Chike stayed where he was, watching until her figure disappeared into the distance. The night settled over the village, quiet and endless. For the first time, Chike understood that he had not lost her because of her leaving. He had lost her the moment he decided she belonged to him less than she belonged to herself. The next morning, he walked to the river where she had spent so much time. The water was calm, reflecting the pale sky above. He sat there for hours, holding one of the clay figures she had made. It was imperfect, like love, beautiful because it was real, shaped by hands that knew both joy and sorrow. Chike placed the figure carefully by the water's edge. As the sun rose, he felt something shift inside him. It was not closure. It was something deeper, a quiet acceptance. And in that acceptance, he found a strange kind of peace. The story of Chike and Amora did not end in victory or defeat. It ended in truth. A truth that would remain in the hearts of those who heard it, that love is not about holding on, but knowing when to let go. Love is not about holding on too tight. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there right now.